Hello, how are you doing? In amidst the excitement of book prize season, if you enjoy following book prizes as much as I do, and I've been making lots of videos about book prizes recently, it can be easy to forget that there are other promising newly published books that are coming out. So I have a stack of books which have just been published here in the UK in March, which I'm really eager to read, and hopefully will read some of them alongside some of these prize-nominated books that I've been talking about. These have been kindly sent to me by publishers. Some of them I've bought myself because I think they just sound so interesting and good. So I'm going to go through, talk through all of these books, give descriptions of them, why I'm so interested in them. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of these books in the comments below. And I also want to mention I was really chuffed this week, as the British say. I was really chuffed that I was a spotlight reader on the website bookshop.org. If you're not familiar with this website, it's an ethical online bookshop, and books that you buy through this website, they are purchased through hundreds of independent bookshops all around the UK. So purchases of them go to help support these bookshops, and it's a wonderful alternative to another big online retailer that shall not be named that sells books. So if you're looking for an alternative to that, I have created a gallery, a list of all of the books that I'm going to be talking about today, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. So it's one place that you can go, a handy place to see all the books at once if you want to consider purchasing any of them, and those purchases will help support independent bookshops, and a small percentage of those sales will also be an affiliate commission, which will go to me, which will help support my channel and help me to make more videos. So not to be too salesy about it, but if you're interested in buying any of these books and want to consider this, yeah, there's a link in the description below, but there's also a link to another list I made of 8 of my most favorite books of all time. So if you're interested in seeing what that is and what I've chosen for that, I'll also put a link to that in the description below. So to start off and talking about the books that I've newly acquired, there is In Memoriam by Alice Winn. This is a debut novel about 2 teenage boys who go to boarding school, and the year is 1914, and they sign up to go to the front to fight in World War I. They also have this romantic desire towards each other. So it's a love story, but also about the horrors of conflict and war, and the social tensions in the time amidst these larger political strife and conflict, which sounds really interesting, really good, right up my street. Coincidentally, one of my other, another book I read this year, newly published this year, that is one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, is The World and All That It Holds by Alexander Herman, which is also a gay love story set in World War I. So that is quite a coincidence that there are 2 World War I gay love stories that are have come out so far this year. And I don't know if I should say this or not, but I was at a book event recently, and I was speaking with someone who is part of the process of selecting books for another book prize that will be coming out later this year. And she asked me if I'd read this book, and she's like, oh, you really should read this book. So I don't know if that's a clue at all, but we may be seeing more of this book in upcoming prizes later this year. Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Cespedes. This is a novel which was first published in the early 1950s in Italy. It's just been newly published in this beautiful new edition. I talked about this book in a list of classics that I want to read this year in a video that I made at the very beginning of the year. I only had a proof copy of this at the time, but this is the finished book, and look at how gorgeous it is. The story is about a woman who is a mother and a housewife who's really busy. When she's out doing errands one day, she just completely on spur of the moment picks up a notebook and starts recording in this notebook all of her thoughts and feelings and impressions, and so which gradually get more revealing over time as she continues to write in these notebooks. And so we get this picture of what it is like to be a woman in the mid 20th century in Italy through this perspective. And it's meant to be a really revolutionary sort of feminist book, classic that's been newly republished. Now, not to keep banging on about book prizes, but another great book prize, which I don't actually follow, is the Stella Prize, an Australian book award, which celebrates Australian women's writing. And someone asked me in the comments recently if I was going to make a video about the new long list for the Stella Prize that came out recently. And I'm not, only because I think the books in it sound really interesting, but most of them haven't been published in the UK. And it's just a thing that not too much Australian fiction gets published here in the UK. I don't know why that is. So it'd be a difficult award for me to follow and talk about because it'd be really difficult for me to get copies of any of these books. But saying all of that, I do have two new books of Australian fiction that I want to talk about. One of them by a co-founder of the Stella Prize, who's Sophie Cunningham. This is her new novel, This Devastating Fever, which follows the life of a woman right at the brink of the new millennium in the year 2000. She is a bit adrift in her life, and she decides to go back and look at a manuscript that she had started earlier, which is about the life of Leonard Woolf, Virginia Woolf's husband. And so she continues on writing this manuscript, but then the manuscript gradually morphs into something much different and something much more personal. But I'm really interested in the life of Leonard Woolf and also in reading new Australian fiction. And this is a new Australian novel that is being published here in the UK. Then there is the new novel Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens by Shankari Chandran. This takes place in a suburb of Sydney, in a nursing home, and is about the different residents of that nursing home, telling their stories, how they come from many different backgrounds and have had many different experiences, and how some people think that some members of this nursing home don't belong there in the community and in the country. And the novel shows the connection between these different older individuals and how they form this sense of community within the nursing home, and how their connections are stronger than their differences. It sounds like a beautiful novel, and I just love this gorgeous cover. Future Fish by Conor Sneyd. This is about a young man in modern-day Ireland who gets a job at a large pet food brand, and at first he thinks he's going to die of boredom in this job, which is developing a top-secret product called Future Fish. But then he gets to know and starts forming connections with some of the many idiosyncratic employees of this brand, and gets more involved in animal and environmental activism. I like this description of an endorsement on the cover by Luke Healy, which calls it fast, funny, and freaky, a book for everyone who ever hated their job. Coincidentally, there are two new novels published this month, which both have gospel in the title. I always think it's really funny when those coincidences occur. So first there's the Gospel According to the New World by Maryse Conde, which I already talked about because it's been long-listed for this year's International Booker Prize. Can't stop talking about book prizes. But this novel is about modern-day Messiah, or who's believed to be boy and man who is going to change the world, and following his adventures and trials. But then there's also this new novel, another new Irish novel called The Gospel of Orla by Eoghan Walls. And this is a story about Orla, who bumps into a man who calls himself Jesus and who is apparently able to resurrect animals from the dead by breathing into their mouths. And so it follows their connection to each other and adventures with each other, because Orla has recently lost her mother, and she's hoping this new companion of hers can help bring her mother back to life. So it's following that story. So it's about grief and faith, but it is also meant to be a very funny book. Until Proven Innocent by Nicola Williams. This novel is about a young female barrister of Caribbean background who lives in London, and an incident occurs where the son of a pastor of a local black church is killed and murdered, and it's believed that the perpetrator is a corrupt and racist police officer, and even this police officer's boss believes that he did it. But this young female barrister, she is drawn into this court case defending this police officer that is accused of this murder. So it's about the tensions and conflicts of that situation. I'm not usually that interested in reading sort of crime fiction like this, and I guess this could be characterized as crime fiction, but it sounds like a really interesting situation and story. Deep Down by Imogen West Knights. This is a proof copy, so this is what the finished copy looks like. This is a novel about siblings, a brother and sister, whose father has just died, and these siblings are estranged from each other. So the sister decides to go visit the brother who is living in Paris when they find out the news, and there they try to reforge a connection with each other, to confront old demons in the past, to try to process their grief. It moves between memories of their past and their present, moving and living around Paris. The author Yara Rodriguez Fowler gives an endorsement of this novel in which she calls it funny, sad, tender, and hopeful, a fantastic book. Then I have a group of new nonfiction, which I think all sounds really interesting, starting off with The Patriarchs by Angela Saini, which is subtitled How Men Came to Rule. So this looks at the history of patriarchy as it's been practiced since the beginning of civilization, and some misconceptions we have about the patriarchy, and addresses how the patriarchy isn't necessarily an inevitability in society, but which is something that we've come to believe to be so. Quartet by Lee Broad, which has this beautiful cover. This is a nonfiction book about 4 different pioneering musical women from the late 19th century and early 20th century, and how they were all really celebrities and pioneers of their time, but with the passage of time they've been mostly forgotten. So she looks at their fascinating different lives, the contribution that they've made to music, and why women from musical history have not been prioritized as much as male celebrities from musical history. This comes with an endorsement by Kate Moss, the founder of the Women's Prize for Fiction. Yes, it all comes back to book prizes, who calls it the most magnificent biography and a rallying cry. I think it sounds kind of similar to the book Square Haunting by Francesca Wade, that looks at the lives of different authors and different female pioneers from around this time as well. So that makes me really eager to read this new book. Then a nonfiction book, very much from a male perspective, Novelist as a Vocation by Haruki Murakami. This is a very rare glimpse into this notoriously, mostly reclusive writer's life and perspective on the writing life and his perspective on some of his greatest novels. Now, I read a lot of Murakami's work when I was in my early 20s, really into his writing. I haven't read him recently or any of his more recent books, but I am interested in knowing his perspective on the writing life. Wolfish by Erica Berry. This is a literary nonfiction book which looks at the science of wolves and also the history of wolves in our culture, how they've been kind of demonized through various folklore and tales passed down through time. I think it's about the author's own experience as well as her study and investigation into the history of wolves. I think it sounds really creative. Also, one of my really good friends has this real fascination with wolves, so I think I need to buy a copy of this book for him. And then finally, I have some new paperback editions of novels which were first published last year but which have only just come out in paperback. So there's Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer, and this is so gorgeous. This was one of my favorite books that I read last year. Yes, lots of people thought it should have been on the shortlist for the Booker Prize last year. It was only longlisted for that award, but look at how beautiful this cover is. This incredible story of a woman suffering from a disease, the effect it has upon her family, and really inventively looks at this disease through a special narrative voice, and giving voice to that in such a creative way. I think it is such an incredible book, and I got this book in a goodie bag for a book prize ceremony I went to recently. Yes, another book prize for the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year award. I've made a whole vlog about this prize and that experience, so hopefully that'll be going up on my channel soon. And then there's the new paperback edition of The Family Chao by Samantha Chang, this really inventive, really interesting book about a family in America of Asian origin and the death of the patriarch of this family and how one of the sons is suspected of killing him, but there are very mysterious circumstances all around it. I think it's a brilliant modern detective story as well as a brilliant story about family life and modern day America. And I think it's such a good detective story. I included it in my book that was published last year, 50 Books to Read If You Are an Armchair Detective. So yeah, I think this is the most current example of a book that I included in this list of 50 different titles. So those are all the books that I want to talk about. Like I said, if you've read any of these books or if you are interested in reading any of these books, please let me know about that in the comments below and we can have a chat about it. Or if you've acquired any other new books recently that you are really interested in reading, whether they are nominated for a prize or not, please let me know about that as well. I love hearing about new books that you're excited to read. So thank you for watching, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.